بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today's lecture is about modesty. And modesty, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, it is part of Iman. And so speaking about al-Hayaa, shyness, is speaking about Iman in reality. And so why is it more important today to speak about al-Hayaa more than ever in reality, even though it is something that is important at all times? Because we see many evils within society today. And we see that society has lost this trait of modesty, al-Hayaa, shyness. And so we see people, for example, sinning in public without any shame whatsoever. Likewise, people not worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal and not having any sense of shame, not from Allah Azza wa Jal and not from the people, and not even from themselves. As we'll come to know, inshallah, al-Hayaa is from Allah Azza wa Jal first and foremost, and then from the people, and also from yourself. Or the way that people speak today, every second word is a swear word, right? Filthy mouths in reality. And so all of this is mazahir. These are examples of a lack of shyness within our societies today. People acting like fools. People acting like fools, especially on social media. A lack of shyness. Or the way that they speak to the opposite gender. There is no boundaries whatsoever. Laughing and giggling and flirting and the likes. There is no shyness whatsoever. Or the intermingling that takes place now within our societies. Things that even the kuffar themselves would have stayed far away from about 100 years ago. Right? So this is only a problem for us in reality. It's even a problem for the kuffar themselves. Right? Even they themselves have deteriorated concerning their modesty and the shyness. And so also we see the lack of shyness from some children concerning their parents. As soon as their parents grow to old age, they throw them to a nursing home without any shame whatsoever, as if it's extremely normal. Right? And we see, for example, a woman in particular, for example, kharrajatan wallaja. She's in and out of her house as she likes, as she pleases, any time of the day. There's no boundaries, there's no shyness, and she doesn't feel any shame. She doesn't feel any shame to be seen in certain places. And likewise, we see the nakedness, especially today. And the nakedness, this is all from signs of a lack of Hayaa. And like I said, this problem, even unfortunately, has affected the Muslims. This nakedness. Especially, and this is why it's very relevant today, because summer's coming up. And we're going to start seeing the ajayib, right? We're going to start seeing very strange things in the summertime. This is when people lose their shyness. And this as a result destroys their iman. Because when you lose al-Hayaa, you lose al-Iman, as we'll come to know, inshallah. Right? And so, all of this points to the idea that the fitrah has been flipped. Right? Especially this nakedness that we see. Because when Adam alayhi salam and Hayaa lost their clothing, what did they do immediately? And they began to cover themselves. And so this notion that we all came from apes, right? Or cavemen that were naked, right? This is completely false. And the way that Allah Azza wa Jalla has designed us and programmed us is to be shy and to want to cover up. And so uncovering is a sign that we have flipped our natural disposition, our fitrah, our nature. And also, we see people have no shyness when it comes to the entertainment industry. People can't even sell things these days without advertising a car, for example, with a naked woman. There's no shyness from the companies themselves. Right? Or when it comes to the movies that people watch and the sort of scenes that people see in movies, there is absolutely no shyness from the people that are acting, from the people that act, and also from the people that watch them. And then even the music, right? The music, when you listen to the lyrics of the music, there is no shyness whatsoever. And you might even have sometimes Muslim women singing these songs with filthy words. And so this is the calamity that we are living in today, right? And this music in particular, and all these things that we just mentioned now, they're a sign of a lack of modesty within society, but also they give us insight into what may reduce our modesty and our haya. So when we fall into these things, what happens to our haya? It reduces and it destroys our haya, and as a result it destroys our iman and it destroys our religion. And that also gives you insight now into what is going to protect your haya. And so you're required to protect your modesty. And so what's going to protect your modesty? Staying away from these things. Staying away from this nakedness. Staying away from music in particular, because music is one of the greatest reasons why people lose haya. And so it was narrated that Yazid ibn al-Walid, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, Ya Bani Umayyah, إياكم الغناء فإنه ينقص الحياء ويزيد في الشهوة ويهدم المروءة. He said, O Banu Umayyah, beware of music and beware of singing. Right? And that was back in their days when it was when singing was somewhat modest. Right? Not with the filthy words that we hear today. For verily it diminishes modesty. It destroys modesty, in other words. And it increases desire. And it destroys dignity. Right? And this is from the greatest tools of shaitan. Right? As Allah Azza wa Jal, He says in the Quran about this. He speaks about how the shaitan, he uses music and singing and the likes to corrupt mankind and to mislead mankind. And so, this is from the tools of shaitan. And so, from the greatest ways that a person can preserve his modesty is by staying away from music, because it destroys his religion. It's not simply just a sin. It is something that is attacking your deen and attacking your religion, your morals. And that's why the shaitan, he loves it, and it's one of his greatest tools. So, there are many virtues of this haya. The Sharia has come and told us how important this haya is. And so what shows us this is that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he described to us the pillars of iman, or the branches of iman, he said that iman is 70 odd branches, the highest of which is the statement of La ilaha illallah tawheed, and the lowest of which is to remove harm from the road. And then he said wal haya'u shu'batun min al iman, that this modesty and this shyness, it is a branch of iman. And so what do we understand from that? That when a person loses it, he has deficiency in his iman. And a lack of modesty and haya is a branch of kufr. Because every branch of iman, to come with the opposite of it, is to come with a branch of kufr. And so this is the seriousness of this matter that we're speaking about today. And also what shows us its virtue and its value and its status, especially concerning iman, is that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said in a hadith, إِنَّ الْإِيمَانَ وَالْحَيَاءَ قُرِنَا جَمِيعًا فَإِذَا رُفِعَ أَحَدُهُمَا رُفِعَ الْآخَرُ. That verily, shyness and iman, they will combine together. And so if one of them is removed and lifted from an individual, then the other one is also removed and lifted. And so the one that has no haya whatsoever, then it is impossible for him to have iman. And the lack of haya implies also a lack of iman. And this is why we need to learn about al-haya, because it relates to our iman. And so, this is why also from the objectives of shaitan is to destroy our haya. As Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, concerning the story of Adam alayhi salam and Hayaa, when he tried to, and he tricked them into eating from the tree. What did Allah Azza wa Jal say concerning this? He says, فَوَسْوَسَ لَهُمَا الشَّيْطَانُ لِيُبْدِيَ لَهُمَا مَا وُرِيَ عَنْهُمَا مِنْ سَوْآتِهِمَا. That the shaitan, he whispered to them, to Adam and Hayaa, in order to reveal to them what was hidden from their private parts. His objective of getting Adam alayhi salam to eat from the tree was in order to get them stripped from their clothing. And so the shaitan, he wants to strip human beings from their clothing, because this strips them from their modesty. Why? Why does he concern himself with this? Why does he want to strip the human being from his clothing? Because he wants to humiliate them. And he wants to corrupt their nature and their fitrah. He wants to flip this fitrah that you've been created with, of being modest and shy and wanting to cover. And also he wants to weaken their iman. And so from the greatest ways that he weakens your iman is by attacking your modesty and your shyness, by getting us naked, stripping us from our clothing. And this applies not only to the woman, also applies to the man. It is not something that is specific to the woman. And also, he also wants to make them lose their honor status as the children of Adam. Because Allah Azza wa Jal, He honored the children of Adam alayhi salam, the human being. Every human being is honored, right? But He wants us to revert into something less than human beings, like the animals. Because the animals do not have any modesty and no shyness. And so, also what shows us its status is that from the sign that Allah Azza wa Jal is pleased with you is that you are modest and you're shy. And from the signs that Allah Ta'ala is angered with you is that you lack shyness and modesty. And a person, the more naked he is, then this is a great sign that he is hated to Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions about when Adam alayhi salam disobeyed Allah, and as a result he became further away from Allah Azza wa Jal initially, before he repented, of course, right? He lost his clothing. And so losing your clothing and being naked is a sign that Allah Ta'ala is angered with you. And being covered up is a sign that Allah Ta'ala is pleased with you. And so this is all from the importance of this topic. And also, and this is what we titled this lecture today, that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لِكُلِّ دِينٍ خُلُقٍ وَخُلُقُ الْإِسْلَامِ الْحَيَاءِ صَحَحَهُ الْأَلْبَانِي رحمه الله تعالى. That every nation, every religion, every nation, every prophet, they have a certain characteristic, attribute that they stand out with. And so the thing that this ummah, our ummah stands out with is al-haya. That should be the greatest characteristic of every single Muslim today. That is the thing that they stand out with. Does that mean that the previous nations before us didn't have any modesty? It doesn't mean that. As we come to know, every prophet called to modesty. But this ummah in particular, this was the greatest trait that they come with. And so this shows us that the best of this ummah are who? It is those that they stand out with this haya. It is the best of them the best of them, the best of this ummah are those that are best in haya. And the greatest in this modesty, in this shyness. And also from the ahadith that speak about its benefit is that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says that al-haya la ya'ti illa bi khayr. That shyness only brings about goodness. And this is when he saw a man reprimanding his brother for his shyness. And he said that I fear that your shyness is going to harm you one day. And so he said, دَعْهُ فَإِنَّ الْحَيَاءَ لَا يَأْتِي إِلَّا بِخَيْرٍ. Leave him alone. For verily, haya only brings about goodness. And so, it only brings about goodness. And so from this goodness is what? What are the fruits of this haya? What does it do to an individual? It instills within him the fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. When a person becomes shy, then he becomes fearful of Allah Azza wa Jal. And that's why Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, لا يخاف العبد حتى يستحي. That the servant will not become fearful of Allah Azza wa Jal until he becomes shy. Shy before Allah Azza wa Jal. And also from its fruits and its goodness that it brings about the person is that it allows the person now to perform good deeds and to stay away from the haram. And that is how it is part of Iman. Because Iman consists of statements and actions. And so what pushes the person into statements and actions is his shyness from Allah Azza wa Jal. That's what calls him into obeying Allah and staying away from everything that Allah Azza wa Jal has prohibited. And also from its benefit is that it increases your Iman. And so when a person has shyness, it increases their Iman. Because after doing good deeds, what happens to your Iman? It increases. And when you stay away from sins, what do? You preserve your Iman. And when you leave something haram for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, your Iman also increases. And so it brings about goodness. But also it brings about blessings from Allah Azza wa Jal. Not only in the hereafter, even in this life. Worldly benefits. And so a beautiful story that illustrates how the shyness brings about goodness even in this worldly life is the story of Musa alayhi salam after he flees from Egypt to Madian. And so Allah Azza wa Jal, He gives us the story in the Quran where He says, Subhana,
ولما ورد ماء مدين وجد عليه أمة من الناس يسقون ووجد من دونهم امرأتين تذودان قال ما خطبكما قالتا لا نسقي حتى يصدر الرعاء وأبونا شيخ كبير. This is how the story begins. And this is a story about shyness and how it brings about goodness. And so he came to a place named called Madian. And there he saw a group of men around the well collecting water. And to the side, far away from the men, he saw two women waiting around. And so he goes up to them and he says, what is the matter with you? What's the problem? So they said, they gave him 8 words. And so this is after them being far away from the men, which is the first show of shyness and modesty, and not mixing with the men and competing with the men for the water. The second show of shyness in this story is the way that they spoke to Musa alayhi salam, where they restricted the conversation to 8 words and nothing else. And they closed the door upon Musa alayhi salam to ask them any further questions, so that they can end the conversation then and there. And so, if somebody wants a guide on how to speak to a non-mahram man, then this is a guide. What did they say? They said, لا نسقي حتى يصدر الرعاء وأبونا شيخ كبير. How many words? 8 words. And they ended the conversation. How did they do that? They said, we will not collect water until the men finish. And the men leave. And then they mentioned an unusual fact. And they said, and our father is an old man. Why did they mention this piece of information? So that Musa alayhi salam doesn't ask them, why are you here doing this? Where's your father? Why are you guys, or why are you girls competing with the men? And so they gave him the answer before he can ask any further questions, so that they can end the conversation immediately. And so he takes the buckets and he collects the water after throwing the men out of the way with his strength, alayhi salam, as we know he was extremely strong, to the extent that he hit somebody and he mistakenly killed him. And that's the reason why he ran away from Fir'aun and from Egypt. And so he comes back and he gives it to them and they leave. With no further conversation, with no flirting, with no smiling, with no giggling, right? And so they go. And then what does he do? He goes and sits under a tree. And he makes dua to Allah Azza wa Jal because he's in need. And so he says, alayhi salam, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khairin faqir. Oh my Lord, I am in need of what you send down upon me from your goodness. I'm in a state of poverty. I am faqir towards you, and every single one of us is faqir ila Allah Azza wa Jal. Ya ayyuhan nas antum al-fuqara'u ila Allah. O mankind, you are the ones that are in need of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, immediately Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, فَجَاءَتْهُ إِحْدَاهُمَا تَمْشِي عَلَى اسْتِحْيَاءٍ. And this is the reason why we mentioned this story. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, immediately one of them came walking to him, one of those 2 girls. And Allah Ta'ala, He described her walking a walk of shyness and modesty. She was walking upon shyness, literally, to show how modest she was. And so, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he commented on this and he said that she was not a woman that was jari'ah. She was not a woman that was very brave in speaking to men, and she was very outspoken and she would raise her voice. Rather, she spoke with all manners and shyness and modesty. And also he says that she wasn't a woman that was kharrajatan wallaja. She wasn't a woman that was constantly in and out of her house. As Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says to the woman, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ, and stay in your houses, right? Unless there's a need, of course, to come out. There is a haja. And so she wasn't a woman that would constantly come out of her house. She would only leave the house when there was a need. Her father was old, and so sometimes she needed to go out and collect water and the likes. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says that she said, تمشي على استحياء قالت إن أبي يدعوك ليجزيك أجر ما سقيت لنا. And there is another way of reading this ayah, and that is that she came to him walking and then stopped. فجاءته إحداهما تمشي, and then stopped. And then say على استحياء قالت, upon shyness she said. And so even her speech was full of modesty and shyness. And then so what did she tell him? She gave him another 8 words, with the same methodology that she used the first time round. And so she says, Inna abi yad'uka liyajziyaka ajra ma saqayta lana. 8 words she gives him again. So a total of 16 words. That was the whole conversation between her and Musa alayhi salam. And so she says, verily, my father, he calls you. He wants you. And so that he doesn't ask her, what does he want? She said, so that he can reward you for what you did of goodness to us. And so he goes to her father. And some of the Mufassirun, they mention that the wind began to blow on her clothing, to the extent that some of her shin became exposed. And so he insisted on walking in front of her, alayhi salam. Because when he saw her shyness, he wanted to preserve her shyness. And he wanted to take that into consideration. And so he walked in front of her, where she would tell him what way to go, so that he doesn't see anything from her. And she walked from behind him. And so they reach her father, and then he tells her father, and some of the Mufassirun, they said this is Shu'aib alayhi salam, but there is no authentic proof that this was Shu'aib alayhi salam. And so he tells him what happened to him all the way from Egypt and why he came to Madian. And so one of the daughters, she says, "Oh my father, hire him. For verily the best one that you can hire is somebody that is qawiyun ameen, somebody that is strong and somebody that is trustworthy." How did she know that he was strong and trustworthy? Because she saw his strength when he threw those men out of the way. And also she saw his trustworthiness, his amana, when he decided to walk in front of her and that he didn't want to see anything from her. And so the father says, "I want to hire you, and your reward is that you get married to one of my daughters. And you work for me for 8 to 10 years." And so Musa alayhi salam, he, of course, accepts the offer. And so he receives work, he receives sustenance, he receives family, marriage, and he receives safety. Because of his shyness alayhi salam, and I brought him this goodness. And this woman also received goodness, because shyness only brings about goodness. And so what was the goodness that came about for this woman? She also received from Allah Azza wa Jal marriage, which is a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And so shyness brings about marriage, right? Contrary to what many people think, that you need to beautify yourself, you need to lose your shyness in order to be noticed by the men, right? The men that are intelligent and they have religion, like Musa alayhi salam, they're looking for a woman of shyness, a woman that fears Allah Azza wa Jal. And so she received marriage, and not only to any man, a man of strength and a man of trustworthiness, and also a man that was going to become a prophet. All of this goodness came to her because of her shyness. And also, why? Also from the things that she received is that she brought goodness upon her family. So it wasn't only the goodness upon her, it was goodness upon her family. For her father and for his honor, that his daughters no longer need to leave the house anymore. And also for her sister, that also no longer needs to leave the house and work. Now there's a man in the house. And so shyness only brings about goodness. So that being said, what is the meaning of shyness now? Because many people misunderstand what the meaning of shyness is. And so from a linguistic perspective, the ulama say it is انقباض النفس من شيء وتركه حذرا من اللوم. It is to restrict yourself from doing things and to leave it off because you fear being blamed, either by Allah Azza wa Jal, or by the people, or by yourself. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala says, Al-Hayaa comes from the word Hayat. Al-Hayaa, which means what? Life. And so the more shyness that you have, then the more your life is complete, and the more life within your heart. And this also shows us one of the benefits of Al-Hayaa, that the more Hayaa a person has, then the more alive his heart is, and the softer his heart is. As a person that loses his modesty, then he has a hard heart. And he doesn't experience the sweetness of Iman and the sweetness of worship in Allah Azza wa Jal. As for how the ulama define the fil istilah, the technical definition, they said it is خلق يبعث على فعل الحسن وترك القبيح. It is a trait and a characteristic that pushes a person into doing something good, something praiseworthy, and it prevents him from everything that is repulsive and everything that is looked down upon. And so this is how it ties in with Iman. That it pushes you to do everything that is good from the actions that are pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jal, and it restrains you from falling into the things that are dispraised in the Sharia. And so this is how it ties in with Iman. And so that being said, there is a difference between al-haya wal-khajal. So some people might think that modesty and shyness means being a person that is weak and a person that has low self-esteem. A person that is very embarrassed and doesn't want to speak up, even if he's being oppressed. And that doesn't mean al-haya, the one that is praiseworthy in the eyes of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, al-khajal is the opposite. Al-khajal is the opposite of modesty and shyness. And that is, as we said, it is low self-esteem. And it comes from a person feeling that he is deficient, he is lower than everybody else. And so, he's unable to face people, he's unable to speak up when he needs to speak up. And it might even lead him to not being able to speak up with the truth, and to command with the good and to forbid the evil. All of that is dispraised in the Sharia. As for true haya, it comes from not low self-esteem, rather it comes from a person's sense of self-worth. And so a person, because of his honor, because of his dignity, and because of his refusal to humiliate himself and to accept what degrades his dignity, he refrains from certain things and he does certain things. And so this person of inner dignity, you might see him, for example, or you'll see him that he's prevented from begging the people and lowering himself unnecessarily. And you'll see him also not allowing others to belittle to and to disrespect him. This is all part of shyness, because he holds himself to a high standard. And this is not arrogance. Rather, this is giving yourself self-worth. So this is where the shyness comes from. Not arrogance and thinking that you're better than everybody else, but holding yourself to a high standard. And also you won't see him committing actions that are shameful and dishonorable. And so this is the person that has haya. And so what it's not is not being able to speak the truth. And not being able to learn knowledge and to ask questions about your religion, especially when you need that knowledge. And what it's not is commanding with the good and forbidding the evil. All those things are not part of haya. Rather, they are dispraised in the eyes of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, and he will mention some realities about al-haya, and also what shows us its importance, that Allah Azza wa Jal himself is shy and modest. And that shows us the importance of this trait. That Allah Azza wa Jal in a hadith, with the Prophet ﷺ, he said that verily Allah Azza wa Jal, إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَيٌّ كَرِيمٌ يَسْتَحْيِي إِذَا رَفَعَ الرَّجُلُ إِلَيْهِ يَدَيْهِ أَنْ يَرُدَّهُمَا صِفْرًا خَائِبَتَيْنِ. Verily Allah Azza wa Jal, He is modest and generous, shy and generous. And He feels shy that when the servant raises his hands to Allah Azza wa Jal, that he shall allow the slave to lower his hands without him responding to his dua. And so Allah Azza wa Jal himself becomes shy from his servant when he raises his hands and begs him subhanahu. And this is the shyness of generosity. That somebody asks him and he doesn't give from his generosity subhanahu. And so Allah Azza wa Jal himself is modest and shy. And He also loves it. And He loves it from us. And that's why the other hadith says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَيٌّ سِتِّيرٌ يُحِبُّ الْحَيَاءَ فَإِذَا اغْتَسَلَ أَحَدُكُمْ فَلْيَسْتَتِرْ. Verily Allah Azza wa Jal, He is shy and He loves, He is shy and He covers the human being from his sins and the likes in this life and the next. And He loves al-haya. And so He loves it from us. And so the one that is modest and shy, he's beloved to Allah Azza wa Jal. And as a result, the one that lacks modesty, then he is hated to Allah Azza wa Jal. And so if one of you performs ghusl, then let him cover himself. And so this is Allah Azza wa Jal. As for the malaika, then likewise the malaika become shy. These great creations of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَلَا أَسْتَحْيِ مِنْ رَجُلٍ تَسْتَحْيِ مِنْهُ الْمَلَائِكَةِ. Shall I not become shy from a man that the malaika become shy from? Who is he referring to? Uthman radiallahu anhu. The malaika would become shy from Uthman alayhi salam, Uthman radiallahu anhu because of his shyness. And Allah Azza wa Jal also, or the Prophet ﷺ, he describes to us that the malaika themselves, they come on a day of judgment and they are shy before Allah Azza wa Jal. And why are they shy? They're shy because they have not worshipped Allah Azza wa Jal the way that He deserves. And they say, Subhanaka ma abadnaka haqqa ibadatik. Glory be to you, Ya Allah. We have not worshipped you the way that you deserve, Ya Allah. And they're shy before Allah Azza wa Jal on the day of judgment. And they are a creation that never disobey Allah. And they spend their lives 24/7 in the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. They don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't get married. All they do is worship Allah, and they are shy before Allah Azza wa Jal. And then some human beings, they worship Allah Azza wa Jal for 1 or 2 hours a day, and they feel like they are the greatest of creation. And they are impressed with themselves. And they feel like they have a favor with Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah Azza wa Jal must now respond to their dua. And He must forgive them of their sins and enter them into Jannah. And so the malaika become shy from Allah Azza wa Jal. And their lack of servitude before Allah Azza wa Jal. And so this is something that all of the Anbiya came with. This Hayaa. All of them, they came and they told their people to become modest and to become shy. And so Musa alayhi salam, the strong man also, he was described to be extremely shy to the extent that he would cover his body extremely, where the people started to think and accuse him of having some sort of disease in his body. Some sort of sickness, deficiency. And so Allah Azza wa Jal, He reveals His body to the people so that they can be silenced. فَبَرَّأَهُ اللَّهُ مِمَّا قَالُوا. Allah Ta'ala, He freed him from the accusations. And so, this was Musa alayhi salam. And our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he was described to what? That he was أَشَدُّ النَّاسِ حَيَاءً. He was the most shy of individuals. And he was أَشَدُّ حَيَاءً مِنَ الْعَذْرَاءِ فِي خِدْرِهَا. He was more shy than the virgin girl that is in her chambers, in her room. Because back then the virgin girl wouldn't leave the house unnecessarily. And so, this was our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the best of creation. The highest in Iman. And as a result, we see him, he's the highest in his shyness and his modesty. To the extent that even the kuffar and the enemies of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they were people of shyness. And so Abu Sufyan, before he accepts Islam, he meets with Hercules, the emperor of Rome. And so the emperor of Rome, he asks him about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, about this man that claims to be a prophet. And so he says, Abu Sufyan, had I not been for shyness, I would have lied against the Prophet ﷺ. But my shyness prevented me from lying, and so I spoke the truth. And this is what a kafir, an enemy of Rasulullah ﷺ at that time, before he accepts Islam. And unfortunately, we have Muslims today that have no shame whatsoever in lying and being known as a liar. Wallahu musta'an. And so, this shows us the importance of this topic. And so, we begin by saying that shyness is from 4. Or 3, but 4, to be more precise. First and foremost, from Allah Azza wa Jal. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Istahyu min Allahi haqqa al-haya." Become shy from Allah Azza wa Jal the way that He deserves. And so we must become shy before Allah Azza wa Jal. And from this shyness is what? What does it mean to be shy from Allah Azza wa Jal? That you don't allow Allah to see you in a place or doing something that displeases Him. And you don't allow Him to see you missing from where you're supposed to be. And missing from an action that you're supposed to be doing. Your shyness prevents you from ever doing this. Because you know that Allah Azza wa Jalla, He sees you, He hears everything. And so, this is shyness from Allah Azza wa Jalla. And also part of the shyness from Allah is, just like the malaika, they're shy from Allah Azza wa Jalla because of a lack of servitude. Then likewise, you're shy before Allah Azza wa Jalla that you have not worshipped Allah Ta'ala the way that He deserves. and that you commit many sins, and your worship itself is deficient. Right? Can anybody put up his hand and say that my worship of Allah is perfect? Every single one of us is deficient. And every single one of us commits sins, and so we're shy before Allah Azza wa Jalla. And this state of brokenness and shyness before Allah is part of our servitude, and it is beloved to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Something that we must come with, and not to be impressed with ourselves. And so, how do we develop this shyness from Allah Azza wa Jalla? How do we develop this shyness from Allah? By constantly remembering that Allah Azza wa Jalla, He sees everything that we do. And He even sees what's in our hearts. And He knows what we're thinking. And so the more a person remembers this, and he remembers that he hears every statement that comes out of his mouth. And he even sees our intentions, why we do what we do, then this brings about the shyness of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And also to constantly remember, you're standing before Allah Azza wa Jalla on the Day of Judgment, where you're going to be asked and questioned by Allah Azza wa Jalla. And so when a person constantly remembers he's standing before Allah, this develops this shyness before Allah Azza wa Jalla. You're going to be asked, as the hadith mentions, that the feet of the slave will not move on the Day of Judgment until he's asked about 4 things. About his life and what he did with it, about his knowledge and whether or not he implemented it, and about his wealth, where did he obtain it from, and where did he spend it, and his youth and how he spent his youth. These questions should always be in the front of our minds. And this brings about shyness before Allah Azza wa Jalla in all areas of our life, whether it be in our private lives, or in our financial dealings, or even in the way that we grow up, and in how we implement our knowledge. And also, from the means to attain the shyness before Allah Azza wa Jalla is to know very well that you're going to be asked about every sin that you've committed in your life. And so Al-Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was asked a question by a man. And he was asked that if I repent to Allah Azza wa Jalla and I'm forgiven by Allah, then is my sin completely wiped away? He said, no. You'll be forgiven by Allah Azza wa Jalla, but you're still going to be questioned by Allah Azza wa Jalla. And then Al-Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he began to cry. And he said that had the slave cried out of shyness from Allah Azza wa Jalla, it would be sufficient to cry over. Yes, you may have been forgiven, but those embarrassing sins, you're still going to be questioned by your master about them. Right? And so even repentance itself is not enough to remove that feeling of shyness before Allah Azza wa Jalla. Even though a person is required to repent to Allah Azza wa Jalla, and the one that repents is going to be forgiven by Allah Azza wa Jalla bi'idhnillah. And also from the ways to attain this shyness before Allah Azza wa Jalla is to constantly remember the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. His endless blessings. Because if somebody, a human being, did good to you, and he showered you with goodness, and you were unable to repay him, you wouldn't be able to look him in the eye. And you would be shy every time you see him. Because he's showered you with his goodness and his kindness, and you're unable to repay him. This is how we've been designed and programmed. And then what about Allah Azza wa Jalla, the one that has showered you with goodness before you were even born, and after you were born, until this very day, and He continues to shower you with His blessings, subhanahu. And He sees you disobeying Him. And He sees you slacking off in His worship. The reason why He created you to begin with. And He continues to shower you with His blessings. Shall we not become shy before Allah Azza wa Jalla? The second type of shyness is shyness from the people. And so even the Prophet ﷺ, he was shy from the people. As Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوت النبي إلا أن يؤذن لكم إلى طعام غير ناظرين إناه ولكن إذا دعيتم إلى طعام فادخلوا فإذا طعمتم فانتشروا ولا مستأنسين لحديث إن ذلكم كان يؤذي النبي فيستحيي منكم والله لا يستحيي من الحق. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He speaks about an incident that occurred, and that is when the Prophet ﷺ, he married Zainab bint Jahsh radiyallahu anha. And he had a little walima in his house. And he invited the companions. And so they came, radiallahu anhum, to his house. And they sat and they ate after being invited. And then after they ate, some of them left, but many of them remained, sitting, chit-chatting. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted them to leave, but he was shy to mention anything. And they're staying for a long period of time. And so he ﷺ was so shy from them that he himself decided to leave his own house. Perhaps they'll get the message, right? Perhaps they'll wake up and they'll say, you know what, the host has left his own house. Maybe we should also leave. Did they leave? Absolutely not. And so he comes back after some time and he finds them still in his house. And so Allah ASWJ, he reveals this ayah that if you're called, do not enter the houses of Rasulullah unless you're invited to eat. And if you eat, then disperse right after you eat. For verily they used to harm the Prophet ﷺ, but he would become shy of mentioning anything. And this is the shyness of generosity and the shyness of hosting the guest and hospitality. And Allah ASWJ, he mentioned this about the Prophet ﷺ in a praiseworthy way. And he didn't reprimand him for this. He didn't say, why did you become shy from them? You should have spoken the truth and spoken your mind. Because they're being rude to you, right? And so be rude to them. He didn't mention it in that way. Rather, he mentioned it in a praiseworthy way. And so it is praiseworthy to be shy from the people and to be a good host, right? And so this is part of shyness from the people. But then Allah Ta'ala, he says, Allah Ta'ala does not become shy from the truth. When Allah Ta'ala wants to show the truth and to make the rulings clean in Islam and defend Prophet Muhammad and do what he loves, then he's not going to become shy from that. Subhanallah. And likewise, we should never shy away from the truth. And so, this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّ مِمَّا أَدْرَكَ النَّاسُ مِنْ كَلَامِ النُّبُوَّةِ الْأُولَى إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. That verily what reached every single nation from words of prophethood before us is that if you don't become shy, do it as you will. What does that mean? Does that mean that if someone maybe istiha ala damu, in other words, he doesn't get shy from anybody, that let him do whatever he wants? And there's no problem in that? This is amru tahdeed. In other words, do as you will and see what's going to happen. As Allah Azza wa Jalla, he says in the Quran, اعملوا ما شئتم إني بما تعملون بصير. Do as you will. Do whatever you desire. Verily, I am over all things watchful. I see all things. In other words, do as you will, and you're going to see the consequences. And it's a warning for the ones that don't have shyness. And they act with a lack of shyness and modesty. And so, this is from the meanings. And another meaning, some of the ulama mentioned, is do as you will, that it becomes permissible. When is that? That if it is something that is not shied away from the people, if people don't consider this to be a shameful act or a shameful statement, then do it and there's no problem. And why is that important? Because as the ulama mentioned, رِضَى النَّاسِ غَايَةٌ لَا تُدْرَكْ. The pleasure of the people and people becoming happy with you and everything that you do and say, this is something that is impossible to achieve in life. Whatever you do, there's always going to be somebody that has a problem with it. And so as long as most people consider it to be fine, and it is halal, and it is something that benefits you, then there's no problem. Do it. And there's always going to be haters. There's always going to be somebody that has 2 cents to insert about what you did and what you said. And there's a funny story concerning this, that there was a man with his son. The man did something that the son deemed to be something that is going to cause some haki, as they say. It's going to cause people to talk. And so the son comes to the father and says, my father, why did you do this thing? Now people are going to talk about you. He says, my son, whatever you do, know very well that people are going to speak about you. People are going to have something to say about it. Right? There's always going to be haters. And so he wanted to teach him the lesson. He wanted to consolidate this lesson to him. And so he said, come with me. They take the donkey and they leave the house. The father jumps on the donkey and the son is walking beside the donkey. The people see them. The next day, they find out what the people had said behind their backs. What did they say? Look at this father that has no rahmah. This father that has no mercy. He's on the donkey and he lets his son walk beside him. Where's the rahmah? Where's the mercy? What a bad father, what a deadbeat father, right? As they say today. And so he said to his son, say, my son, you can't please the people. The next day, he takes him again. That same day, in other words, he takes him again and he puts his son on the donkey and he walks beside his son. And so the next day they find out that the people had said, well, look at this son that is undutiful to his parents. Al-aaq liwaliday. What an evil son. Where's birr al-walidayn? Where's good treatment to the parents? Right? This time they spoke about the son. He said, see my son, the third day what did they do? They went out and both of them on a donkey. What did they say? Ya haram. Look how they're torturing this animal. Where's the rahmah to animals? Where's animal rights, in other words, right? Where's animal rights? They're torturing this donkey, ya haram. He said, see my son? And then the next day, what did they do? They went out and none of them jumped on a donkey. Did they solve the problem? Absolutely not. What did the people say this time? They said, look at these idiots. What do they have a donkey for? What's the point of having a donkey if you're not going to use it? Right? So the people always have something to say. And what are they supposed to do now? Maybe the next thing they should have done was what? Put the donkey on their backs and walked out. Maybe that would have solved the issue. Right? Wallahu musta'an. And so the point was that if it is something that is not shied away and it is permissible and beneficial to you, then do it, there's no problem. Because you're always going to find somebody that they have something to say. And so the third type of haya, and we'll end with this inshallah, is al-haya min al-nafs. You should become shy from yourself. And what does that mean? That you see yourself to be a third party. And you would never allow this other self of yours to see you doing something shameful, or to be wasting your time and doing something that implies that you don't have any self-worth. Whether it's committing sins or doing things that are dispraised, or being lazy and whatever have you. And so this is holding yourself to high standards. And likewise, this is something that is from shyness. And so to conclude, we need to preserve our shyness, because it is part of iman, especially this summer coming up, right? In the way that we dress, in the way that we act, in the places that we go to. Because in summertime, people, they go and intermingle and they listen to music, and that's when the parties are on, right? And they destroy their iman and they destroy their religion. And so we need to preserve our haya, our modesty, especially in summer. And as a result, we preserve our iman and our religion. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to beautify us with this haya and to make us people of al-haya, and to guide our shabab and our youth to what is best and what is pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Ta'ala alam wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa jazakum Allahu khairan.